Hello.
Hello.
All right. I don't know. This thing changed. It's weird now. The intro kind of just tags along, and it's like I just want to be part of the show. And then go.
Yeah,
Oh,
but it doesn't cut the music anymore. It used to cut it up. Now it plays it all the way through. So
it's just going to be the awkward video that just stays.
it's part of the podcast.
Alyssa, you're back. Thank
Hi
you for coming
guys.
back.
Hi, Lissa.
That was good timing. The name came on right when you were doing the intro.
I know it's all planned.
Brilliant.
Cool. So today we have a bit of a different. I don't know if it's different, but topic. But one of them I'm actually interested in. I'm interested in all of them, but I'm interested in this one
Thanks,
too.
Fab.
I imagine.
Are you
All
saying
the
you're
other shows
normally
have been
bored,
brutal.
Fab? When I'm with Paul, usually I'm bored, but thank God
Oh
I
my
listened to her.
gosh. Yeah, the shows
Keep
with
it
with
interesting.
Paul are brutal. So it's how to build a marketing team, which I thought was really interesting because obviously this sales and ops podcast, but the marketing team is such a critical part of the revenue uh, process. I don't know, motion, I guess, and so that's why you're here on a regular basis. But ultimately, the execution and the quality of the marketing happens because of the marketing team. And I really found the subject you proposed, interesting because that's we've all lived that, I think. But definitely, Alyssa, this you've worked in marketing for a while, and so have I. And I still work with marketing teams. Like we just notice that it's often you know not given the importance it should have. I'm trying to find the right word for that.
Fab, are you trying to be politically correct?
I
What
am trying.
Fab's trying to say is often marketing teams suck. Okay, there we go.
And
Yeah,
they're considered secondary in a lot of cases.
Yes, exactly. So, yeah, let's maybe start with that. You said it's considered secondary, and you're right. I think, and here we're talking to B2B companies, right? I think if you're, e-commerce type of thing, like marketing is probably the only thing you're hiring. But if you're talking about a B2B company, whether it's SaaS or more traditional, marketing is often one of the later roles to be brought on. Or what I've seen is like if it's not one of the later roles, it's often very junior people and that are given kind of the weight of the world on their shoulders, which is like generate leads for like these 6 reps that we just hired and not really trained. And we could talk about sales training another time, Paul. But is that what you're kind of seeing too? That's what you're alluding to when it's kind of secondary?
Yeah, for sure. And yes, you're right. So direct to consumer brands tend to be more marketing centric. Now, I will caveat by saying, as just a business coach holistically, I recognize the importance of hierarchy of the different functions of an organization. And despite the fact that I have a history in marketing, I'm not touting it as in any way the most important.
No.
And it's not. It's truly not. So sales are king. Sales is important. Sales is essential. So building a sales team, first and foremost, in addition to effective operations and good leadership, is where you want to start. But once companies have that kind of figured out, and especially if they're more B2B, whether it's product or service, so again, not direct to consumer necessarily, they get big enough that they recognize, okay, maybe it would be nice to offload some of this awareness driving and conversion tools, lead generating initiatives onto someone internally who's not the CEO or one of the managers or the sales lead, right? Who often takes on marketing as kind of a secondary pet project in a lot of ways. And you're right. It's usually the case of like mid-sized organizations. So you maybe have anywhere from 5 to like 50 people, let's say. You're focused on production, you're focused on execution, you're focused on sales, and then marketing becomes something that, oh, let's just find someone inexpensive to just execute for us. And there's 2 ways that companies do that. They'll, one, hand over the entire marketing department to an agency. I'll get to that, just the pitfalls and risks involved in that, but also the nice relationship you can develop if you're on top of it. But often they'll instead, because it's a cheaper option, they'll go to a junior marketing person that they hire. And the real risk there is that you have someone then who doesn't have the ability to strategize or long-term plan or to lead others. And when it comes to marketing, unless that person is a total workhorse, they're going to have to lead others to actually help with the execution in a lot of ways. Or if they're just an executor, they need someone to guide and lead them with strategy. And it's only at kind of an upper management level, I would argue, that you get someone that can tackle both of those things and maintain a sometimes precarious but also vital in relationship between sales too. So as you have to start navigating lead generation and qualification potentially for your sales team, you need to be a pretty high functioning executive to be able to manage that role. And a lot of
Mhm.
and companies hire too low and they put them in the deep end and they just drown. And then they wonder why.
That was a great insight.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So as an SMB, let's say you're an SMB and you're wondering and you're building, and you're right. I think there's a hierarchy of things, and people do tend to go after sales typically before they do marketing. But in Fab's example of certain companies will need marketing without sales if it's something that's inbound and a service that you're buying online. And just to come back to the title, essentially, where do you start? Like, where do you suggest you start? So let's say you say, okay, I've gotten a certain point. I'm either thinking of outsourcing, keeping it. Like, what would you say is the first basic thing that company who's now delving into? I think we need marketing. Where should they start? Where should they? What's the first thing they should do, or what's the first thing you should do?
So I would say the first thing internally is to revisit and or create, because a lot of businesses actually don't really have one, an accountability chart. And I use the term accountability chart instead of org chart because I work within the entrepreneurial operating system, usually with clients. And so we refer to it as an accountability chart, where all of the roles and responsibilities of your organization are clearly defined with particular actions that must be accomplished by the person in that role. And then you have this clear understanding of what that job actually is. No people attached to it. So I think the first thing, and this is what you do, Paul, obviously with sales recruiting, is that you need a very defined and clearly understood role where there's a hole in your organization and what that individual who takes on that role needs to do in terms of their priorities and their functions and their capabilities. So once you have the role defined, then you know what caliber and type of person you need to go after finding. Because if you look at the job description, let's say, for lack of a better term, or that particular function in your accountability chart, it would have, let's say, 5 metrics below it of they need to be able to be strategic, they need to build a plan, they need to be able to help qualify leads with the sales, they need to be able to easily communicate with our sales VP, they need to manage a creative team in terms of execution of our top 4 marketing tactics. If those are all the things that person needs to do, then you can clearly understand like what level of capabilities that individual needs to be at, who can successfully do that role. And then from there, you have the ability to put out, your recruiting efforts and find and hire that individual.
Okay, interesting, very interesting. And I guess go ahead, Fab. I think you had a question, and I'll wait because I can hog this. As
No, I
you
mean,
are aware.
um, the thing that kind of popped up for me, and maybe we're getting too far off topic, so feel free to let me know. But I really like this idea of the review. Let's call it create, because let's be honest, most people don't have an accountability chart. Is that and I can see how that would be a challenge for most people, right? Like that's probably if you had asked me, that was not the first thing that I would have thought of, but it totally makes sense. So, and I'm thinking for companies that are, mainly in the SMB startup world, right? So they're just, venture backed, a lot of changes, investors require changes very quickly. Is that something you would recommend for them as well? And taking that into account, I guess.
Yes, in terms of, sorry, what was the question though?
Well, the question is like a lot of startups. So I know smaller companies that have been around for a long time and doing the same thing. That's maybe a little bit easier to fill. But I could understand. I could see how the challenge would be if you're a startup and there's a lot of change and a lot of flux in your company.
Gotcha.
That yeah. And so how would you
Hard to define that role.
how would you work with them, or what would you suggest to them, I guess, if you're in that type of company?
Yeah. Well, I still think that even if you're hiring someone, it's because you recognize there's a gap. So either
Yeah.
someone is taking on too much work than they can handle, or there's some actions that are not happening, or priorities in the organization that are falling short because you're lacking either the expertise or the manpower to do it. So even if you have that gap, you're aware of that gap, that gives you enough information, I think, to create a very clear and defined role for your marketing person. Because not only will it affect your job description in any kind of online recruiting platform in which you're trying to find them, in terms of a job post, but also once they come onto the organization from a managerial perspective, you need to, as a good manager, make very clear to them what their roles and responsibility actually is. And if it's muddy or gray or unclear or chaotic, you're setting that person up for not necessarily failure, but a difficult time and potentially like a higher likelihood of failure.
Fair enough.
Yeah, so I would challenge even a startup where there's lack of clarity. I would hope that startup still has at least a 1 year to 3 year vision of where they want to go with the organization, and they can build an accountability chart that reflects that 3 year vision. And then they have that person and that role in place, not even that person, that role in place, and then they find the person accordingly. Yeah. Org charts are key. A lot of organizations don't do it. And from a sales perspective too, I can imagine it would be also incredibly valuable. But it often gets not actually done, surprisingly, by like mid-sized entrepreneurial organizations.
And why do you think that is, like in your experience?
I think is to Fab's point, they've just been existing and growing and flying by the seat of their pants a little bit by like adding people and taking on roles and wearing a lot of hats. It's somehow a badge of honor in a lot of ways when you're a startup to wear all the hats.
Yeah.
But at some point, and earlier than later would be advantageous, you need to start defining what the real organization is going to look like. And that's where I like the idea of having a 3-year plan always, and then building your organization or your accountability chart to like, okay, what roles do we actually need in the organization to achieve this growth target of $40 million in 3 years, right? What do we need to be doing, and what kind of roles need to be existing in the company for us to operate at that level?
Yeah, and again, I think, and maybe that's not part of an accountability chart, but I think it's also understanding your strengths and weaknesses within there. You mentioned kind of the CEOs and founders or co-founders, and like kind of their inability to really help coach and mentor and train a younger person and have a strategic vision when it comes to marketing. So I think it's also maybe forces you to be a bit more honest with what you're actually able to do and not able to do, right? Is that
Totally.
fair
And
to say?
sometimes when you think about in relationship to sales too, I mean, there's often muddied waters and a blame game that happens between two siloed divisions of an organization, being sales and marketing. So even if those are just two people, sometimes you get the butting heads between, oh, that's your job. No, that's your job. No, that's your job. Right. And so when there is real clarity for both individuals leading those departments, and what each is responsible for, and discussions had as a transparent organization about, okay, what are you going to take on? What are we going to take on as a team? You're just setting both your people up for success, and you're setting up your entire customer journey experience from lead gen through sales, through actual execution of whatever project or production is, to, what do you call it? What's the HubSpot term for afterwards, Fab? I forget the proper HubSpot term.
For after the sale, you mean?
Yeah. Not even after sale, but like after you're done the project with them for resale or follow up. Or
I mean, obviously we could call it whatever we want. Growth, expansion, retention, depending on your business.
Yeah.
Usually you'll go through some sort of a growth motion where you try to grow that account.
Yes.
And then expansion or upsell or renewal, again, depending on how your business model works after that.
Yeah. And that has to be a kind of a team effort in a lot of ways, right? Like there could be marketing input even at that stage, when one could argue marketing just as lead gen. So if you've got 2 people or 3 people doing those jobs, you want to make sure everyone knows, what they're responsible for really clearly. Because if it's too messy, no one will do it. And then everyone just gets unhappy and fights.
Yeah, fair enough. Paul, you've been very quiet, and I know you wanted to say something before.
Well, one thing that I'm wondering, and it sort of falls back to what we said originally, is that we often divide marketing and sales, and we categorize things. But I think in this whole conversation, and I think you're saying this with the accountability chart, is like, what are the objectives of the business, and how is marketing going to help me achieve that objective? And so I love the idea of how to build the marketing team, but really, what are the objectives we're trying to achieve, and how is the marketing team going to help me get there? And I think you can't separate that from marketing and sales. So that's to me where I think they're really interleaved.
Yeah.
And one thing that I'll say, and I probably should have said it earlier because it's related to what we said in the intro, but it's just popped up. And you hear this from a lot of, obviously it's self-fulfilling statement, but more senior marketing executives that have worked at startups. And, I think it's one of the roles that you need to hire sooner than you think you do. A lot of times, like you were saying, Alyssa, like we wait until like there's clearly a gap and somebody's doing too much, and or their sales are not getting enough leads. And what you're doing there is you're also setting up your marketing person to fail, right? Because when there's usually a gap in the organization, i.e., sales aren't getting enough leads, I mean, it's almost impossible for a marketing person to come in, understand everything, like build up a whole lead generation or demand generation process and feed the sales team at the exact same moment because we need it now, not yesterday, or if not yesterday. So I think this accountability chart, which I'm really starting to like the idea of, but is something you should probably do before you even think you need it and before you need to start hiring anybody, like, i.e., every time you have a hire. I mean, we're talking about marketing now, but I think it would allow you to maybe justify to yourself or to your investors or whoever that you need to hire marketing sooner rather than later. And I would definitely not wait until there's a need, because that's already too late. You're pretty much setting up your person to fail, right? And then you get into these, and I remember Paul and I had a show a long time ago, but that's where you end up with these murky marketing tactics of buying lists and spamming people and all that, just because you're trying to get something to move the needle super quickly. And then it's a vicious cycle. So I just wanted to add that in.
And sometimes when you have like a mid-sized organization too, where the founders or co-founders or whatever they might be termed, are still wearing a lot of hats. So they're the leader, they're the GM or CEO, but they're often also the lead of sales and maybe even the leads of ops. Maybe they have an ops person, but they're head of finance, right? And so one thing you can do too, in the way the accountability chart helps, from a leadership perspective, as an owner of a company yourself, you can figure out, okay, what are the aspects of my job as sales and marketing VP when I wear that hat that I don't want to do anymore? And what am I still going to maintain responsibility for? So then you can realize, okay, I could hire a junior person if what I needed them to do was my social media posts and email marketing. But I recognize that in my job description as the VP of sales and marketing, I still need to do the strategy. I still need to provide them with creative content. I still need to manage the agency relationship. So then you have a clear understanding that no, I still have to like do a bit of this job if I'm choosing to hire a more junior person. And then that junior person is supported and you have full transparency of, what you still need to do as a leader versus just passing it all off with unclear expectations. And the other add to that too, which I realized I dropped off, but mentioned I'd circle back to, is sometimes as well, an organization has passed off their entire marketing department in a lot of ways to an agency partner. And this is sometimes very economical. Agency partners are fantastic combinations because they can execute and they can help with strategy. But one of the things that can be hard for a person coming on as an internal marketing lead in that experience is that you have a team of people who have been running a department and you suddenly come in and as their new boss, right? So they've been like left to their own devices, getting paid happily, very little monitoring or viewing, probably because the CEO and the founder of the organization has other things to do. So they've just passed off that whole part of their business to an agency partner. And then all of a sudden you come in as this mid-level to junior internal marketing person who has to like lead, manage, technically be the boss of this company. And it can be a very daunting and very difficult role. And you're also setting someone up for, failure in that regard too. So I've seen that happen as well. And so it is precarious.
Yeah, and you see that a lot. I've seen it. I haven't seen it as much as a full fledged like everything gets done by advertising by an agency. Sorry, but um, I've definitely seen it a lot on the content space, like where we'll hire a content agency and then you have a junior marketing come and they have no way of really understanding, right? They're still junior, understanding whether this content is actually good. And
Right.
like you said, this agency is just getting paid per post or whatever, and
Yeah.
not really mindful of these results. And so then you are setting up this person for failure because at the end of the day, this new junior person you've hired is the one who will have to report on numbers that they don't impact at all and they don't have the experience to help guide and change and restructure.
Yeah.
And on that note, I'll see that often, and it usually comes to cost saving reasoning, is that we're not hiring an agency for the right things. You know what I mean? Like, so basically, we'll do like our Google ads and our Facebook ads in house because like the agencies are too expensive. But we'll uh, we'll hire like an agency to rebuild like a website. But we don't know why, right? And so like we're just well, maybe the budget should have gone towards an agency to manage the ads because they actually know what they're doing, and you have to have a valid way to track their success. But that's another thing that I've seen. Is like sometimes it's just the decisions are purely budget as opposed to again this accountability thing where the need may actually be.
Yes. Yeah, it's managing a business relationship when you get into hiring and working with an agency partner, because they have a vested interest too, right? Like they need to run a successful business. They need to make a profit. They want to do the best they can for you, but also if making a new website gets them more profit and is more profitable for them than doing some other job, they're going to probably propose that potentially
Yeah.
in your marketing plan, right? And that makes sense. It will serve you well, but it also serves them well too. So you need someone who's capable to have the business's interests truly at heart, which in turn serves them well as a successful marketer within that organization, and be able to call that out amongst a partner who you're hiring, who is their own business in their own right with their own vested interest and agendas in some ways.
Cool. All right, so we've created our accountability chart. We kind of know, first of all, we also accepted that we need to hire a marketing person sooner than we think we need to have one. We have a clear understanding of what they want. We realize that there's an agency role maybe at play here to take into account. What's kind of the next step in your experience?
Yeah, then it's a matter of making sure that, well, Fab can offer even more, or sorry, Paul can offer even more insight here, but in terms of the actual recruiting process, you're going about the right way of setting yourself up to find the best candidate out there. You really want a good number of individuals that you can truly vet through a number of different interview experiences, right? To really get a sense of who that person is. You want to ask the right questions. And again, in order to ask the right questions, you need to know what this person will be doing, a very clear understanding of what this person must deliver and do in your organization. And so if you have that combined with this, nice interpersonal experience with someone, ideally you find a nice fit. And there's always the outliers who turn out to be, the opposite direction that you could not foresee. But ideally you get someone who's great and feels like a fit. And then you need to really set them up for success within the organization as well. And from a marketing perspective, and I won't talk generically about onboarding necessarily, but I think from a marketing perspective, it's really important for a marketer to have a good understanding of what has worked in the past, what is failing right now, and what you currently have in terms of your general positioning and lead gen efforts out there in the world. But really getting a holistic understanding and having an owner do that research in advance, or whoever is the person steering the ship at the time when that person
Mm-hmm.
is hired, giving them a general lay of the land, like a true honest assessment of the current situation, so that marketer can use their own brain to do an appropriate audit and then course correct as need be. Because ideally you're hiring them to course correct in some way, right? Because if the course was running smooth, you wouldn't need that person.
So
Right.
So
I
it's
think
onboarding them with a lot of valuable information to allow them to use their expert brain, and you need to be open to their suggestions and their changes as well.
you said something there that I think is key, and particularly in marketing, is you've got to be very specific on the KPIs or the objectives, why you're hiring them. And Do you want SQL? Do you want lead generation for sales qualified leads? Do you want MQL, marketing qualified leads? Are you looking for someone to do more branding? And I know that, there's a lot of murky waters there, but you've got to be very specific with the expectations of what you're looking for, so that when you fill out your scorecard, to use the EO methodology, they know exactly what it is that will be expected of them. And it can't be fluffy and undefined, and then so that 6 months later their boss says, hey, you didn't achieve your objectives. What do you mean? I did this, I did that. So you want to be very specific and tactical with what they need to achieve directly. And for me, the big mistake that a lot of people say is, well, I want, marketing to give me leads that are going to close. If they're not in charge of the leads are going to close, you're setting them up for potential failure because they're dependent on the sales team. Yeah. So how to find these people, and Alyssa and I spoke about this week, in your recruitment methodology, which I didn't invent, but I stole from a whole bunch of different people, or I acquired from a whole bunch of different people, or I learned from a whole bunch of different people, is, have a good filter right from the start with an evaluation, have a very concise questions that you ask to onboard the right people, and then dig down into their capabilities. But the first thing you need to establish is, what am I looking for specifically? And if you're just willy-nilly, well, I'll know when I find it. Yeah.
No. I mean, that's such a great insight, Paul, because it's like, having worked in marketing my whole career until I became more of a admin ops person.
Well, both of you worked more marketing before.
Yeah, but that's going to talk about my own experience. Is that's what happens, right? Especially in startups, is that they want everything, right? And finding that marketer that can actually do everything is I'll say impossible. And usually when you want lead generation, is that it's too late. It's just that your salespeople are saying they don't have a big enough pipeline. But I've also seen marketers being hired for the wrong reasons, right? Because they did good in the interview, and they were likable, so to speak. But in the end, their priorities and their approaches were so different than what the business needed at the time. And I have obviously my hat on and my perspective on what's a priority for a company, but like, I think it's important that you have a very clear idea. Like, if you feel you need branding, like, and you're hiring somebody who's good at branding, like, you have to steer away from, like, hey, we've got no leads coming in. I'm like, well, that's not what you asked me to do. And if that's what you asking me to do, then your branding has to be very purpose driven, and that's maybe not the right person. So yeah, that's critical.
But exactly. And if you're hiring someone junior, or you're starting off from the beginning, well, then you got to be even more specific about what you need. But
yeah,
to me, though, one thing I will say, and I don't know if you guys agree, but to me, marketing, sales is an extension of marketing, and marketing is an extension of sales. So they go together. You can't really separate them, at that point, like muscle and tendon, like they go together to a certain extent. And if you try to look at them in a separate world, I don't know, maybe it's too philosophical, but I think you need to look at it as a holistic approach of how these things are going to work together. And you're right, Fab. And I think I've seen that too, where, oh, this guy's going to be really good. And, well, he's just going to do marketing, and he's done well in the past. And then suddenly, 6 months in or a year in, well, we're not getting the results we want. Well, what are those results? What are the KPIs? And why in your interview process were you not specific about that, so that you could ask questions to those exact ends, right? And then you can know exactly what they're going to do. And then you can also decide, well, do I want to spend all day with Alyssa and Fab as my marketing people? Do I get along with them? But that's, I don't want to say it's secondary, but you've got to make sure first that they have the qualities to be able to do the job. And then you look for the fit with the company. Can we communicate? Can we have a conversation? Do we speak the same language?
Yeah, and I think they need to, especially on the marketing level. I mean, I guess for any, I only work with revenue focused teams, but like with any team member, you need to make sure that they also fit within your company philosophy. I would say would be important, right? If somebody's very gung ho into branding and like, hey, we're going to be all, all out there and our website's going to be amazing and so on and so forth. And you're like a pure data person and you just want raw numbers and raw leads coming in because you have a whole great sales process lined up afterwards. Yeah, you might like Alyssa or Fab, but they're clearly not the right fit if
Yeah.
their philosophy is very different than what you need. Yeah,
So
sorry.
I think we're all saying the same thing essentially is and I think, Alyssa is using the EO method, the traction method. And what we're all saying the same thing is you got to be really structured in what you're looking for before you start looking for someone.
Yes. Well, and I'll caveat too with that in the same way there's different types of salespeople, as we've talked about, and I'm sure you guys have too. There are different types of marketing people too. And I think there's a certain type of marketer now, having worked with a lot of mid-sized organizations, independently owned, relatively small-ish. You can go with a marketer who's from a big Fortune 500, right? So like what I used to do at Unilever, creative marketers who manage large agency teams, and their job is just purely awareness, like messaging out to the abyss to let the humans on planet Earth know how amazing their product is, right? And that is just a general, like, get attention, be creative, be dynamic, and it's very creative. It's very visionary and kind of outside the box, and you're just meant to drive awareness, and you get measured by your Nielsen data and number of eyeballs and views on ads. There's lots of metrics to show that. Now, debatable whether that translates into sales. Ideally it does, but there isn't that exact metric. Like ideally as a marketing person, your job is to come up with amazing creative campaigns that like get lots of visibility, maybe click-throughs, but we're not directly correlating that to anything totally. I mean, it takes a while to get the trickle back to like, is it selling at Walmart? I don't know. But then from a mid-sized organization, I think it's really important to find a marketer who's to some degree analytical, so who can look at actual mine data within the organization of how sales have gone and how execution tactics have resulted, because you have that closer connection. But I think in some ways it has to be a fairly more sales-minded marketer than a visionary creative marketer. And I think those are different beasts in some ways too. And when you're hiring for a mid-sized organization, I think a marketer that works best for you would be someone who understands sales, truly like has a sense of what selling entails and how they can then turn that into more awareness driving messaging that truly correlates back to tangible sales. Yeah.
Can I challenge you on that?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Well, what if that mid-sized company just wants to brand it first and is not looking at sales? Maybe they want to build a brand, they want to get known, they have a lot of funding, and they're a guitar company, and they're like, okay, we're marketing it first. We have our sales guys talking, we have our reps talking in stores. We're happy with that, but now we want to sort of develop a new market, and we just want to be seen as like that cool guitar company that uses.
Yes. Sorry. I should have caveat that I was thinking more of a B2B relationship. Okay. You're right. When it comes to, and that's why it's good to know the difference. So that's great. Thank you, Paul, because that is why it's important to know the difference. So do you want the visionary creative who may not necessarily have their amazing, beautiful, fun campaigns correlate directly? Or are you more egalitarian from a B2B perspective where I want these email marketing to be really strategic. I want it to go to these particular past clients. I want to say the right things, and I want it literally to drive into my salesperson's inbox with the qualification things. So it's two different marketing people you're looking for. So if you're looking for that person in a B2B, let's see, service or even product relationship, and they're doing like, but it's so beautiful. Look at this creative piece. And the salespeople are like, I don't care how good my aluminum part looks. Like, I need you to actually sell the engineering behind it, and I need you to help communicate the product so that I can actually turn that into a sales call. Or you're right. Do you want that guitar company that needs to drive awareness? They have pretty good presence in retail, and now they just need people driven to store. They want Ryan Reynolds to play it tomorrow. If you're a Ryan Reynolds fan, he seems like a theme in our podcast, right? Do you want him to be playing it on Instagram? If that's yes, then you need that visionary person. So you're sorry, thanks. You're right, Paul. But I feel like at least who I work with a lot of times, they need a marketer that can really understand sales and be a nice partner to sales in a lot of
Okay.
ways.
Yeah.
Cool.
Great.
I mean, Paul, I know you have a hard stop, so I think unfortunately we'll have to summarize it. There's so much more to say here, but I mean, my biggest takeaway is that you need to have a clear vision, understanding of what you're looking for. But I think on the last point is you need to have a marketer that fits your philosophy, right? Like if your philosophy is to be out there and you believe in branding and you believe that branding is what is going to drive sales at the end of the day, and you're kind of doing a Hail Mary and hoping it'll happen, then great. If you're not, if you're very analytical, tactical, and your sales team want leads and you need somebody to be able to deliver on that, I think, whether you're in B2B or B2C, some industries are more one or the other, but generally speaking, they have to fit your philosophy. Those are my two takeaways.
Philosophy and your needs.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Philosophy and needs. That's what
Yeah.
it boils down to.
Totally.
Cool.
So have a growth vision and have an accountability chart.
Yeah. Nice. Awesome. Perfect.
I will say you're
Awesome.
like the EO queen now. I love it, man. You just like you absorb it, you live it, you breathe it. It's you. I love it.
Cool.
Thank you.
All right, Paul,
Thanks,
Alyssa, thank you so much. Take care.
Bye, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks for joining.